Welcome back to another episode of Mosaic Minds Podcast. I'm Nick. This is Jason. And today, if you've been with the podcast for a while, and from the beginning of the podcast, we've been big supporters of Dropping Dimes Foundation. And we've had some incredible guests like Bob Nedelicki and Scott Tarter, Darnell Hillman, that shared their stories and their mission to help, some of the former ABA players. So a couple weeks ago, Jason and we had the opportunity to go see the documentary, The Waiting Game, at Newfields here in Indianapolis. And it was really powerful. The documentary, it doesn't just tell about the history of the ABA, but it shows the real impact that this league had on the game in general. And, kind of the disservice that was done to the ABA players. Today, we're going to have the director and the writer of The Waiting Game, Michael Husain, on. And he's going to kind of go into a little more detail about, how he got the idea for this and how this all came about.
Welcome to Mosaic Minds, the podcast where every episode is a colorful blend of perspectives, ideas, and conversation. Each week, our diverse team of hosts brings their unique backgrounds, experiences, and interests to the table. Mosaic Minds is your invitation to join the conversation to see the world through a kaleidoscope of viewpoints. So grab a seat, tune in, and let the mosaic unfold before you.
So, Michael, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. So why don't you let's just start out by how did you come about getting an interest for this cause in the first place? Is this something that, did you know Scott? Or is this something that you just kind of fell upon and you're like, wow, this is a big deal. We need to talk about this.
I grew up in Terre Haute, so I'm a basketball fan and was a Pacers fan. We could get a fuzzy signal from Channel 4 in Terre Haute, and so I remember the ABA days. But I was nothing more than a fan until I actually met Scott Tarter in December of 2021, and I just liked him. He was a nice guy, and he was telling me a little bit about Dropping Dimes, and its reason for being was to help ABA players that were struggling financially. And I think probably like many people, I just thought at first it was like, oh, these are guys who just did poor financial planning and that's why you're helping them. And he's like, no, it's very different than that. They didn't make any money during their time as players. They were making, in the early days of the league, $25,000 a year, and in the later years, maybe six figures, but that would be a rare player. So they didn't have a lot of money, but he told me about basically a business deal. The merger is what I would always heard it called. And he called it something else, but he was definitely not calling it a merger, that it was a business deal gone bad essentially. And that lots of ABA players were really struggling. And what he described was guys, being evicted from their homes, sleeping under bridges, not able to afford life-saving medicine because they didn't have health care. And to me, that was stunning because I remembered Darnell Hillman. I remembered, Dr. J. These were the elite athletes in the world of my childhood. And so how is it possible that guys of that caliber could be struggling in that big a way? But it was true. And so Dropping Dimes have been formed to help them. And the thing that really hooked me is he said, we've been negotiating with the NBA. And at this point, he was saying for about 13 months. And it's been a long negotiation, but I think we're very close. I think within about 6 weeks, they're going to announce a pretty significant settlement's the wrong word, but something to help these guys. And I thought, well, that's actually kind of a feel-good story. And so could we follow this? I'm a story guy. So could we follow you for 6 weeks until that happens? You can never recapture that kind of a win.
Right.
And he allowed it. And we followed for 6 weeks, and then because it was supposed to be at the All-Star break, the NBA All-Star break in February, and the All-Star game came and went, no announcement. So, the following week he calls the NBA and says, hey, what happened? They said, it's just some technicalities, got to cross some T's, going to be about a month, but this is happening. Okay, great. So month comes, month goes, nothing. And that went on for a while. And so, you have to realize that these these ABA guys, they're in their 70s, some of them in their 80s. So there was an urgency to their story that I didn't realize at first, and certainly the NBA didn't realize, because guys started getting sick, and then guys started dying, and I could see it taking its toll on Scott. Now, Scott co-founded the Dropping Dimes Foundation with Dr. John Abrams, and they were very ably assisted by another guy named Ted Green. And so they all deserve, credit, because they've been working on this for years. But Scott was the guy who was negotiating with the NBA. So it was him who kind of became the focal point of our story. And Scott was really struggling. You could just see it in his face. And I think I didn't even really know the extent of it until a while later. But so what started off as a 10-minute short feel-good film was sort of unfolding into a bit of a tragedy. And so we followed and followed and followed. And then finally, late in that summer, the NBA did come through with about a $25 million pot, so to speak, that guys who had played at least 3 years in the ABA could draw from as what sort of seemed like a pension, but they would never call it a pension because there were legal implications to that. So they called it a recognition payment. And so if you played 3 years in the ABA, you got about $300 a month per year of service. So, maybe you got $1,000 a month if you played 3 years, and maybe $2,000 if you played 6 years. And so, it was something. It's not going to save you from eviction, and if you got a serious medical issue, it's not going to really put a big dent in that. But it was a measure of respect, and so I think it was meaningful to the guys. But there's clearly still work to be done. And so a lot of the film ultimately, so we finished filming the Dropping Dimes story in August or so of 2022. Then we had to go back and tell the backstory. Like, what's the ABA? To guys our age, we may remember it and the red, white, and blue ball and all the fun that the league brought. But to guys my son's age, clue that it even existed.
Yeah.
And so when I started telling my son or his friends or guys like that and girls. My daughter played basketball. When I started telling my kids, look, the NBA game that you love and that I love, its origin story is actually largely the ABA. It's not the NBA itself. So the ABA innovated the three-point shot. The ABA created the slam dunk contest. The ABA embraced a pace of play and an athleticism that the NBA did not. The ABA was wide open to black players. And so it created tremendous opportunity for black players, the NBA was integrated at that point, but in a limited way. Mm-hmm. Teams had 2, 3, maybe 4 players, and rarely would all those players see the court at the same time in the late 60s. So the ABA just didn't care. The ABA wanted the best basketball product it could put on the floor, and if you were black, white, green, they didn't care. They would put you on there. And so black culture and sort of fashion and a lot of the entertainment value, halftime shows, all that came out of the ABA in terms of basketball. So incredibly influential into the game that is now worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. So that's why the ABA was so important. And we had to go back and tell that story. So we went back and interviewed Bob Costas, who got his broadcasting start calling ABA games in St. Louis. And we caught up with Julius Erving, Spencer Haywood, Dan Issel. Darnell Hillman became a really important interview for us. You mentioned Bob Nedelicki. He's in the film as well. So we were able to get a lot of just great people of the era to talk about the importance of the ABA and to talk about the kind of injustice that had happened to those players. You can kind of equate them to like factory workers when a merger happens in a business, and the workers who created all the value in the company don't really get taken care of in the business deal. It's kind of what happened to these ABA guys. They created the modern NBA, the modern the game of professional basketball, and they got almost nothing out of the deal.
It's really interesting that, I think the point of the movie was very fascinating, very heartwarming. But one of the craziest things is I think that the importance of the movie is just the getting the word out there, because, like you said, anybody and everybody that finds out about this, they're either shocked or they didn't realize how deep it went. So I think that it's very important that this movie exists, because I had never even heard of the Dropping Dimes Foundation until we had Bob on the show. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I thought he said Marching Dimes, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah.
That was classic. That's classic.
So yeah, I think if this, just getting the word out there and getting this movie out there, I think will, it's always about the pressure, right? So you get that pressure on the NBA. I think that could go a really long way.
Well, yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because, really the first person to amplify the story was a writer for The Star, Dana Benbow.
Mm-hmm.
Dana wrote stories about dropping dimes, like the first story she wrote. And I learned this after the fact. So, shame on me for not reading The Star enough. But her first story was about a former Pacer, Charlie Jordan, who in 2016, if I've got the dates right, just wanted to get a suit to go to church, and he couldn't afford it. He was struggling with some health issues as well. And so, just such a small, meaningful measure, right, to get a suit to go to church. And so Mel Daniels, who was instrumental in sort of kind of ringing the bell and saying, hey, these guys, my ABA brothers, are struggling. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And so Mel was there. It was the first kind of gift, so to speak, that Dropping Dimes did. They had been formed that year or the year prior. And so they went to a big and tall shop here in Indianapolis and got Charlie Jordan a couple of suits. It was just a meaningful thing for Charlie, and just the beginning of people understanding that, these guys need some help. And then what Dropping Dimes learned, and what Dana learned and continued to amplify in her storytelling, was that the problems were much more dire than a suit. There were guys who, down in Kentucky, there was a player who had his heat turned off and was heating his trailer with a kerosene lamp.
Wow.
and just very, very sad things for any human being, let alone guys who brought so much entertainment and we worship athletes. I mean, it's, they're in their prime, they're gods. They can do things that we cannot, and it defies what you believe can be done. And then, Father Time is undefeated, and they get older and get forgotten. And these guys, unfortunately, had gotten forgotten.
Yeah.
So Dana wrote stories all the way through the unfolding of this story.
I think sitting in the audience as a fan, just to give a little background, there was a young lady there that I believe was the first state champion. They were talking about the greatest team ever assembled. Sorry, I'm not.
I think that's right.
I got to be careful what I say, but around 1969, I believe, was said it was the greatest high school basketball team of that era, ever, basically. And then, I think future cities that this
Wayne Pack, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Wayne Pack was who became a Pacer ultimately, but he was a part of the Indianapolis Washington team. They also had George McGinnis on it.
I think what I want the audience to hear and understand is when this movie comes to your city, you need to go watch it, because I'm a basketball historian through and through. 2 years old was my first basketball goal in a grass on the barn. I played for 40 years, right? Being mid-40s. That's all we did, on the side of a silo. But transitioning back to where you're at, I'm not too prideful, and I'm going to tell you something that hopefully hits you. I had tears in my eyes 4 and 5 times, and I'm going to tear up right now, because it's so crazy to think that this guy has a car lot of 8 cars that all are worth more than what my house is worth, and a young man that was the pioneer, was the trailblazer of the whole entire NBA, can't get that sense of dignity and respect. I mean, without those guys, you don't have guys making, with all due respect, $500,000 a game. I've heard statistics. The last guy on an NBA bench is making more than every player, every manager, and every coach on an ABA roster in today's dollars. So, you start to hear that and you understand that and you see that. The fact that you were able to encapsulate that and put it in a bottle and kind of throw it in the ocean and let the world see it, man, it's just so inspiring, because I'm sitting over there, I'm trying to gain my composure, and every 15 minutes I'm looking over there and I'm trying to be settle or act like I've got itches and stuff. But I can't tell you enough how, man, it it was great to be a fan that night. And the thing that I wanted to say that I want you to hear as well, that I think is important to hear, when the mic was being passed around, when you guys were on the panel after it was over, the thing that I wanted to say is I didn't want to get booed and make a joke to say, I know we're in Pacers country, I know we're in 317, but you guys are the Trailblazers, right? Kind of a play on words, because when you trailblaze and you show and you understand and you see, what better city is that? And then you've got an all-time IU great, Alan Henderson, there. I thought that was a great touch, because I'm like, wow, last time I saw him was 1995, 30 years ago at an all-star game as a junior. So in other words, you've got the historical background, you've got the right city, you've got the right people there, and then a player that I get to call on the way home tonight and tell my dad was there in Louisville. I mean, it's just, you're doing great things. So I just wanted to first say that. Now, when I ask you this, you as a, I could call you a lot of things, but I'm going to call you a producer, a writer. Well, there you go. But I mean, I could call you a producer, a writer, composition of material, whatever it is. Why did this hit your heartstring and you say, that's it, as opposed to I'm going to put my thoughts and feelings into another project?
That really evolved. And I think that's true of most of the stories. Documentaries take a long time to do. So for instance, I did a film prior to this in 2021 on addiction and in how addiction had hit Brown County, Indiana. We just looked at one county, and it was called The Addict's Wake. Thankfully, we in my family had not had any addiction issues to speak of, and so, which is somewhat rare, but I didn't know that at the time. And so I started off with that. For instance, it just was a human story of people struggling and trying to recover and trying to redeem. And once I started learning about sort of the strength it takes to go through recovery, that was another layer that kind of drew me in as a storyteller. Like, those are some of the strongest people you're ever going to meet if you ever meet somebody in recovery. And then learning about how intertwined the underlying pieces of addiction are, where it's not just a choice, so to speak, which is a common way of thinking about it. There's usually a great deal of pain and mental illness that's wrapped into it. Now we're getting to something where we've had mental illness in our family. So now it's getting closer and closer. So the stories sort of pull me in step by step. With the ABA piece, I'm a sports fan. I've done a lot of work with ESPN and folks like that. And I love the stories that come out of sports. And I thought the ABA was just a really cool league. That's all. That was my memory of it. It was cool. So I thought, that's attractive. But it was really the humanity of Scott Tarter that really started to pull me in. Like, I'm watching this guy struggle, and he's struggling with something he could get rid of in a minute. He didn't have to be doing this. He was kind of, it's sort of popular to say he was on a hero's journey, but he kind of was, and so I was just watching that unfold. And then when I got to know and interview Darnell and Bob Nedelicki and a couple of other guys we got in the film who are not Indiana based, Ralph Simpson, who lives in Denver, was a superb player in the ABA, multiple time All-Star, as was Jimmy Jones, who now lives in Las Vegas. Met and interviewed both of those guys. And those are guys who are really struggling. Ralph had some serious health issues, heart issues that he was not going to get taken care of because the bills would have been too high. Jimmy is in pretty good health, thankfully, but, financially he's driving an Uber to try and just make ends meet.
Yeah.
And so the pride that those guys have, and when you meet a guy like Darnell Hillman, there is a dignity to Darnell Hillman that is sort of unmatched. And so they all care about each other. The ABA was really tight. And so they call themselves sort of a brotherhood or a fraternity. And I think it's true. If you call Nedelicki, he'll have everybody else's number. Like, if you want to get a number of an ABA guy, call Nedelicki, because he's got them all. And so it's just that sense of, I guess, in the lack of a better phrase, community between those guys. That was another thing that just sort of kept pulling me in. So it became much bigger than sports. I was attracted to sports initially, but it really quickly got past sports.
Yeah, one thing I thought was interesting about the film I didn't realize is I remember the ABA, but I wasn't a huge follower of it. So I thought it was really interesting the way that it was described as, like they were the pizzazz, like they were the first to allow like tattoos and like afros and things like that. I thought that was really cool. Almost like, like with the Wizard of Oz, like you got the NBA black and white, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's color, brought in the pizzazz to the league. And yet, we don't, like you said, people younger than a certain age have no idea who the ABA even are.
Yeah. I mean, I think and if you don't know who the ABA was, it's hard to imagine a world. It's hard to imagine the world before color, right? And then the black and white films or whatever. So it's hard to imagine a world in which players don't express themselves with whatever their hair choice is, their facial hair, the clothes they wear, but whatever. It's the expression and the personality. And some would say it's gone maybe overboard, with the sort of personal branding. But in general, it makes the game more interesting. Basketball is a great sport because you can see the players. They're not like in football, hidden under equipment. So their personalities are really evident. And so the ABA embraced that, didn't try and hide it. The NBA was described at that point as being corporate.
Yep.
It was, you dressed in sort of a suit or nicer clothes as you traveled, and your hair was a certain length. And, you can imagine, as people have told stories from the 80s of what IBM was like, right? Everybody had a blue suit and a white shirt, and you marched in, and so I think to a degree, the NBA was that, and so the ABA shook that right up.
I think when Darnell was talking about the ABA, for me, it was interesting to hear that it's the cycle is kind of the same now. That if you're 6'9", you don't have to be a back to the basket center. If you can shoot the 25-footer, you can rebound, you can high fly, you can use some pizzazz. That's what it's all about. So back to the movie, when you're putting that together from a fan perspective and an historian of the game, which is what, for the second time I'm considering myself, but what the most profound thing that actually teared me up the most is the timeline that was, how do I want to say this? Your production value was very simplistic in the way that it was presented, but it just literally showed that I'm going to use my own words, but I'm trying to get the audience to kind of to dig into it, investigate it. It was heart-wrenching to say, hey, over these 15 months, when said organization drug their toes in the sand, we had X amount of funerals that were planned. And I'm not trying to take it to that level, but it's just like, man, it's like, that's super frustrating to think that something as simple as stopping an infection, a knee surgery, dental work, X, Y, and Z, and then these guys are literally the guys that, like, how many one-name guys do you have? I mean, you got Moses Malone, you got Ice, you got Doc. Like, I throw my hands up and I say, man, you can't get bigger than that. Those are the pioneers of the game. And then when you put all that together, the production value is very nice to see that. And it was disheartening to see. It wasn't meant to, but when you hear about a current guy that drops $1 million in, and I'm doing my math, but I think you get about $1.4 million as a match. I mean, in corporate America, what is it? 6% match or whatever, and you're getting 140% match on a 140% match. I think we would all be living in mansions if that was the case. And then that's not to downtrodden the NBA current. That's just to say there needs to be recognition and cross-population there to say, hey, these are our brothers that were pioneers of the game. I mean, Darnell could kick the bottom of the backboard, for heaven's sake, first slam dunk champion.
And grab a 20 off the top.
Exactly. And then you see today's game, and I got to be honest, there's parts of the game that are great, and there's other parts that you kind of shake your head at. So when you do this and you present this, and you're from a fan's perspective to see what that individual city, not saying there was a difference in perception, but how was the Louisville, and then what's maybe the next city or two that you plan to kind of do the barnstorming, if you will, in those ABA cities?
Yeah, so as we're trying to get the film out there and get it seen, there's a few ways you do that. The most traditional way that people would understand is, used to be you go to cable. Now it's a streamer, a Netflix or a Hulu or whatever. And we have a representative who is out pitching that to them, but it's a long game to do that. and certainly far from guaranteed. No matter how good your film is, the road is littered with good films that didn't make it onto one of those services, and some crap that did make it on the service. But anyway, so what you can do as a filmmaker, and in this piece, to me, we're sort of talking about it as important, and there is an important piece of it. There were guys who were left out of the pot of money that was provided in the summer of 2022. And so there's work that needs to be done because there are guys still struggling, and as are families, right? So they're on a tremendous amount of widows benefits. There's some need. And so it's important to get the film seen, and I don't want to wait a year for a Netflix deal. So we're trying to take the film out in community screenings. And so we've done that 4 or 5 times here in Indianapolis. We premiered at the Heartland Film Festival, but then like when you guys saw the film on the 28th of February, we were at Newfields. They have a beautiful theater there, trying to just get the word out, and then go to other cities as well. So while our next screening is actually going to be in Terre Haute, not an ABA city, but I grew up in Terre Haute.
Exactly.
Lots of ABA fans there. I know that. But then we went to Louisville. So another ABA city. They had the Kentucky Colonels, and what a great time. I didn't know exactly what it would be like not being in Indiana because, again, John Abrams, who did a lot of the medical consulting that those guys needed, for dropping dimes, but he was a ball boy for the ABA Pacers.
So cool.
And then Scott Tarter grew up on the east side of Indianapolis. He went to games with his dad, Indiana Pacers guy. So a lot of the story kind of hubbed around the Pacers in Indiana and what they meant, but there's really just representative of what the Kentucky Colonels meant to Louisville, what the Denver Rockets meant to Denver, the Utah Stars meant to Salt Lake City, and so on. Every ABA city had kind of a little bit of a love affair with its team, and Louisville was I wasn't sure what to expect, but we got 3 Kentucky Colonels to come out and nice. Be a part of it. We got Joe Hamilton, Wayne Chapman, whose son Rex played in the NBA for many years. Yeah. And then Louis Dampier showed up, kind of unexpectedly. And Louis, not big to go out to public events. He's I don't want to say reclusive, but he's a private guy. And so he showed up, and I don't think he was quite sure what he was getting into. But again, like we talked about the brotherhood, I think he came because Wayne and Joe were there, not for me. And then it turned out he really liked the film. And so he actually came up for the Q&A session afterwards, and I just think had a nice night because the film, yes, it's to raise awareness, and there's a story that's a little difficult in places. It's emotional what happened to these guys, but it is a celebration of these guys too. We want them to get that recognition. I love when at the end of this film, people stand up for a standing ovation, not for me or the filmmaking, but for those guys. And so that's really cool to watch. Mm-hmm. And it's happened at almost every screening.
I think that your Q&A thing that you do at the end, I think is an amazing idea. So I assume you said you did do that in Louisville then? Is that something that you'll do that at all of the majority of the showings?
Yes, we will. As many as we can. If we've got the time and we've got people there, we will do it.
Yeah, I think that was a great idea because then you get to kind of see the human side. Like one thing that Scott said that I thought was interesting. I think it was Scott that said it, but it was definitely about him. Was that you don't think of a lawyer as somebody that's giving back to the community. And he's so humble about it. He's not somebody that cares to I don't think to put himself up there and be like, hey, look what I'm doing. He doesn't seem like that kind of guy. So that's really interesting, and I like the Q&A because, like I say, it kind of humanizes some of the people not only in the film but also the basketball players as well.
It was a special evening for Nick and I because we were already somewhat connected to several people in the film, so seeing them on the big screen right in front of us. But a cool residual that I want you to hear, there was a couple couples behind us that when we were shaking hands with a few people that we had already known, they weren't even basketball fans. So I think you have to say that it's kind of a curator at a museum, right? Is kind of like you brought that to life because Black history was celebrated there. A film was celebrated there. Non-basketball fans were actually there, but there was a ton of basketball fans. So I think it was a cross section of people Because I would think if I'm going to go to that, with all due respect, I'm a diehard basketball fan. You know, I'm going to 20 games a year, you know, but it was so cool to see people that, oh, that's who that person is, or, oh yeah, I recognize that name. And then seeing multi-generational. I'm going to let Nick tell you real quick, but he brought his son there, and Nick, I want you to share the experience that your son had at the.
Yeah. Actually, I was gonna, and I think it was you I was talking to on Facebook. It was either you or Scott on Facebook, where I was saying that my son he likes basketball, but you know he told me then he's like, Dad, that was really good. And he's like, and I don't even like documentaries.
To me.
Okay, yeah. So you know, like but he loved it, and I think that's a good point too. That you don't have to be a basketball fan to appreciate this movement and to appreciate this film, you know, because it's something that I think that everybody that's human can relate to.
Well, I have to give credit to a couple places there. My editor and the guy who shot it all, Brian Boyd, and he's a producer on the film as well. We spent a lot of time just kind of turning it over, looking at what if we did this, what if we did that. So, you know, a lot of the creative decisions, they don't happen without Brian's help. And then honestly, my wife, you know, she is my sounding board, and she is not a sports fan. And so if it doesn't connect with her as a human being, it's not working. And so as much time as I spend on these things, it better work for her. We're going to have a problem. So she really gave me some great notes on, like, you know, okay, this legal journey that these guys are on. I don't understand it. I'm lost. So we had to simplify, like, okay, let's break it up a little bit, and let's, you know, and there were other times where, you know, she doesn't know who Dr. J is, you know, or she got a reference point on Michael Jordan, because she grew up in Chicago. But other than that, so, you know, letting Dr. J's archival footage just play.
Yeah.
So you don't have to I didn't have to tell her once we did that. She could see it. It's like, she's like, oh, that's like Michael Jordan, what he's doing. Like, yeah, he was Jordan before Jordan. Like,
exactly.
So you got it. And so now understand that why he was so important to the NBA, and that's why this next step is so important, and so on and so on. So really try to tell stories from a human point of view. I've often described this as it's a human justice story wrapped in sports clothing. It's a sports story, and everybody's dressed in basketball uniforms, but it's really a human story. It's about, you know, as you guys have mentioned, this sort of dignity or lack of dignity that in the way that these guys were treated, and so everybody can kind of understand that. Everybody, you know, people can see and smell disrespect.
I think basketball speaks an international language, you know, as the Europeans are taking, you know, a 6-year-old and sending them to a basketball college/elementary school, first grade over here. You know, I don't want to get controversial to you, but I'm telling you right now, that's why the Europeans are catching up to us. You shouldn't be able to go to a basketball academy, but if you're taking 6 or 7 hours worth of classes and you have a nice gym to play in here in Indy even, that's acceptable to me, right? You got to have that combination of the two. So when you're at the perspective that you're in, what is the definition of success when you go to these cities? And I'm just not even going to speculate on it all. I'm just going to turn it over to you and let the experts speak on that.
It's an interesting question with multiple answers, because so I'll go back to the addiction film that I talked about earlier. There were times where we had community screenings with that film. Gosh, we're only maybe 30 people showed up. You know, it was like, we kind of look at each other and say, oh, this is not what we'd hoped for. First of all, you know, you're not making any money, right? So, you know, it's, you know, and that's one thing, because you do have to, it's a business here. You have to make some money, on the screenings. And so then there's that. But then, you know, one person would stand up and, talk about how much the film that they had just seen, one of those 35 people, had impacted them. And it was like, well, that's everything. That's why we made the film. Yeah. So this was a success. This film had impact. And so, I think that's true. So in Louisville, we had maybe 120 people, which is smaller than, I think we had 300 at Newfields. So I don't think the size of the crowd is necessarily the ultimate determinant. It's important, right? We market the films. We try and get out on social media or, sports radio or whatever and talk about it. Because we want people to know. And I think once people know, they'll make a plan to get to see the film. But if you have a smaller audience than you expect, there's still deep impact that can happen. So, the way it hit you, which was, thank you for telling me that. It's very nice to hear as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, that you connected. That allowed for this, right? I mean, so you guys see the film, you're moved by it, and so now we're talking about it again. So that's a success. That your son, who doesn't like documentaries, saw one that spoke to him.
Mm-hmm.
That's a success.
Yeah.
So because I think there's a couple things you want to be able to do. You want to, I get back to sort of the business model, right? So you want enough support, whether it's sponsorship for those screenings or fans who come and attend to do enough business to make the next screening possible, right? Because they all feed on one another. But you also want to impact the story, which is that there's still work to be done. And so one of the most gratifying things that has happened through this journey with this film, we premiered at the Heartland Film Festival in October and filled up that same theater at Newfields, which holds 500 people. And it was great. It was crowd was into it. It was loud. Players got a standing ovation, all of that. But about a week later, Scott Tarter goes and picks up his mail, and in it is a check for the largest single donation that Dropping Dimes has ever received from a woman who had been in the crowd and seen it and been moved and wanted to do something about it. And so they've had a bunch of contributions come to Dropping Dimes because people have seen the film. And so that's what we should be doing, right? So I never even met that person that night. So, that was a success and I didn't even know it.
Right. Well, I know we already kind of talked about it. I want to make sure that we go back and everybody knows how they can watch this movie and where you're going to be at next. This will air on the 18th. So we can use that as the base for the timeline of when the next showing is and all that. But that said, real quick, off the subject of the movie, what are some other projects that you have going on and some other ways that people can find some of your work?
My personal website is goodvibesmedia.com. That's the name of my company. But the Waiting Game has its own website, which is thewaitinggamemovie.com. And most screenings that are going to be coming up, they're listed there. You can't actually watch the film there. It's $10 and you can click through and watch the film at home. But largely we're doing it through community screenings. So in terms of other films, I did do a short film called The Sugar Man, which came out last summer, about a 14-minute film about the boxer Sugar Ray Seales, who was a 1972 Olympic gold medalist, the only gold medalist in boxing that year. And that's the Munich Games where there was the terrorist attack. He had a really nice professional career, was, on a championship level. And about 10 years into that career, he gets thumbed in the eye. Because he needed the money, he kept fighting. And now he can't see when the blows are coming. He gets hit in the other eye. And long story short, over the course of a few years, he winds up losing sight in both eyes. So he not only retired, but he couldn't coach boxing. He couldn't do the thing that had brought him a lot of joy and all his notoriety. And so 8 failed surgeries to try and get vision back. Finally, Dr. John Abrams, who is the doctor in The Waiting Game, the eye doctor, Seales was living in Indianapolis because his wife was from here. And he finds Dr. Abrams. Abrams takes a shot to see if he could get him some useful vision. Abrams is an incredible surgeon. And so he got him eyesight back in one eye. And it's really, really good eyesight. Like, we followed him at a 4-year checkup. And he's like close, not quite 20/20, but really good vision.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's awesome.
So, and Seales is this amazing character. He carries his gold medal with him every day in his pocket. So if you met him, he would pull it out of his pocket. He'd let you hold it. He'd let you take a picture with it.
That's awesome.
Because he says, this is America's gold. It's not just mine. It's America's.
So cool.
So cool. So anyway, we want to take that 14-minute film and expand it to a half an hour and put it on PBS. So we're just starting to fundraise for that. But, right now, so much of my efforts are about telling the story of the waiting game and trying to get people out to the next screening. We're going to do 2 screenings in Terre Haute, one in my old high school. Nice. Which is really going to be fun for me. So I went to school at West Vigo, which is out west of Terre Haute, and we're going to screen out there on March 26th. And there's tickets available. I'm sure if we don't yet, we'll have a link up on the waiting game movie.com, so you can find it, or if you search West Vigo waiting game, I'm sure it'll come up. But and then we're going to do another one at Rose Holman there in I believe it's April 12th. I have to double check that. April 12th, April 13th. And then we're going to be in a couple more film festivals outside of this area, in New Jersey and Asbury Park at the Garden State Film Festival on March 29th, and out in Phoenix at the Phoenix Film Festival, April 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And so, it's starting to expand out that way, but, our bread and butter is still going to be community screening. So we want to take it. I just had a conversation with a theater in Memphis. So we're trying to book the next round of screenings. Memphis had not one, but 2 ABA franchises, although not simultaneously. They had the Memphis Sounds and the Memphis Tams. So I think we've got a theater there that looks like it'll work. And so probably in about 6 to 8 weeks, we'll have a screening down in Memphis. I would love to get it to Denver as soon as we can. I mentioned Ralph Simpson, who's there. His health is not great. And while he's seen the film and loves it, I want him to be in one of those audiences where people stand up and cheer. Yeah. So I really want to get it to Denver. I want to get it to San Antonio. That's where Bob Nedelicki kind of lives down near there now. And they're a great AVA town. And so, but it's going to probably take some corporate underwriting to actually make that happen, because the chase for me to try and find, a sponsor in Denver, and really probably a grouping of sponsors in Denver and a grouping of sponsors in San Antonio, and I don't know those cities. That would be a very long and tall mountain to do it. I'll do it if we need to, but it's going to be hard. So I think if we can find some corporate underwriting where somebody wants to sponsor those screenings in those cities, that would make a lot of sense and be incredibly helpful to getting the message out. But we're going to go to ABA cities. I think we'll wind up going to other Indiana cities too. I think that I've had some inquiries to take it up to Fort Wayne, for instance. I think we'll take it to Bloomington.
Yeah,
so that'd be perfect.
That would be good.
Yeah. And, and actually with Bloomington, what's interesting, beyond, if you know Bloomington, like the Buzzkirk Chumley Theater right there on Kirkwood is a beautiful theater and a place that you could hold a community screening. But the university there, I think this is the type of film that law school students ought to see, that business students ought to see. Like, this is kind of what happens if you take humanity out of your decision-making process.
Exactly.
And so I think we'll have audiences there. I graduated from IU myself, so I'd love for it to be integrated into the university at sub-level. So we'll get there.
No, Michael, I get to do the fun thing to give you your official send-off. So the official send-off I have for you is non-waiting game transitioning back into waiting game. You ever heard of Wolf Field being in Terre Haute? Wolf Field, they're at the track right at Indiana State University.
Uh-huh.
There's like about 6 aluminum basketball goals that are single posted. They probably stood there for 30 or 40 years.
I know those. That's Wolf Field?
Yes. Okay. So what's cool about that is the backboards were loose and there was 4 bolts on them. And I think you know what I'm going to say here. I played basketball there 6-7 days a week for about 3 years. And I kid you not, I shot 85 to 90% from the field. One-handed, two-handed, shot put throws, because all you had to do is hit the top of the backboard and then it just funnel in. People wanted to fight me. We'd have 15 teams lined up and we were not the most talented. We'd go 20-0 on the night just because anywhere that you hit top backboard, it would just fall in. So that's my Terre Haute story. I've actually got a couple people that I'm going to invite to the screening there that are Terre Hautians that now live in the Plainfield, Indianapolis area.
Nice.
So that'll be a great opportunity. Here's the send-off for waiting game. So I was an extra in Blue Chips. So I met Al Bundy.
Because you could shoot like that.
Yeah, it was. Well, no. I was the guy that was at the baseball all-star game that there was lightning and stuff, and I had baseball cleats on. walking around in the celebration, and Bobby Knight was right there, the Hollywood cameras. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Being a historian, not only of playing basketball, but being in basketball, let me not butcher the saying, but it's 49 other states it's a sport, and Indiana it's basketball. You're in a perfect spot for it. Indiana is the epicenter of basketball. I think that's when you got a guy that we mentioned, McGinnis just got the gym named after, if I'm not mistaken, there at George Washington High School. That kind of ties in the waiting game. It was a waiting game for you to make the film. It was a waiting game that unfortunately had an expiration date on some lives that could have been impacted, but it's more of a human story that transcends sports, real world, culture. It doesn't matter where you're from. This should touch your heartstrings, because when you really look at it, the effect of basketball that's had on the economy of just Indianapolis is phenomenal. New neighborhoods, the WNBA franchise, as you well know, is expanding with a practice facility. That's great to see. But when you watch that film and you're given an opportunity to take steps into that, it's nice to see that the bridge and the gap is at least starting to build over the river to where we're not on opposite sides of the earth anymore. We're at least transitioning to the middle. As more people see it, more people get excited about it. I know that where you want to take it, but it can be taken there. We just got to keep after it. You're working hard, but honestly, you got to tell your friends about it, because I don't want to call it unheralded, because it's partially heralded in my opinion. But what I'm trying to say is, whatever I want to say is, you're getting there. You're making inroads. You're building that foundation, because it's phenomenal to see 3 players in a city that's honestly 2.5 hours from your base, in my opinion. And they came out and they showed out. So imagine what Memphis is going to do. Imagine what Terre Haute's going to do. I think people will start to come out of the woodworks, and it's good to see a cross section of people from Nick's son, teenager years all the way up to, 75 and 80-year-olds and anything in between. So great work. Keep up the projects. Keep doing the human interaction, and keep telling the story from your side of the desk. And it's phenomenal job. Yep. Nothing but respect for it.
Thank you very, very much. And this is very important this is independent filmmaking, which is what this is a very grassroots effort. It takes not only me talking about it, but you guys talking about it, and friends and family. And then, you get your friends to come to a screening in Terre Haute or whenever the next one is in Indianapolis. I had a conversation with a guy who wants to see if we could get it to play at Crispus Attucks, maybe in their gymnasium or something, or they have a theater, because Oscar Robertson has a small but important part in the waiting game. And so, he played in that place. And so I love being able to connect some of our icons and our love affair with basketball into this story, and a kind of a growing community who know about the film and want to do something about it. So I agree with you. I think it's just keep talking, keep spreading the word, and we're going to get there.
Absolutely.
And so I couldn't be more appreciative of you guys, having me on and just talking about the film. And basketball is fun.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We should appreciate you being on, Michael. And that is the waiting game. And for anybody that's watching on YouTube, we'll make sure we have all the ways to see it in the description. And then if you're listening to it, we'll make sure that we have the links in the show notes. So again, Michael, thanks for being on. Maybe we'll do this in the future, once you become, if you got time for us, once you become a super famous star and everything, then we'll have you on then as well.
Well, I'll be thrilled to come back anytime.
All right. I appreciate it, Michael. If you could mind, I'm going to...